a newspaper article just came out in the big paper in Oregon, the Oregonian, about how the Mongols were in Oregon, how the Gypsy Jokers, the other clubs didn't want us there. Pretty much saying like, hey, there's this war going on. Everyone pay attention, right?
Welcome to this episode of Chatting with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Moot.
And because of the fact that, I'd come from another club and, I had a reputation in my area and stuff like that, I actually didn't prospect. So, I was a Mongol for almost 15 years, but I actually came in without prospecting. The Mongols have what they call a P patch or probationary patch. So though you may not prospect, you wear like a diamond that says a P down on the bottom of your vest, and you're a probationary member for a year. So, you have to help prospects do stuff, help out with security and stuff like that, but you're not getting ran like a prospect.
One thing I want to ask you is, it's called a patch over, right? How you got patched in. So do you feel like some of maybe the prospects who were trying to get into the club maybe had a little bit of animosity because you were patched in like that instead of having to go through the strict probationary period?
Yeah, I can imagine. There's different things to it because, I started the first chapter in Oregon, and so there was no prospects or there was no Mongols there yet. So it wasn't like I was spending a lot of time with these California guys that had these prospects and they're like, who's this new guy coming around? But on that level, I was traveling with the guys quite a bit. I was going to California. And there was definitely, Youngster and some other really solid guys that turned out to be great brothers that were prospecting at the time, that were putting in the work and doing it the right way, and see me just get brought in. So I always made it a point not to utilize prospects or use prospects because I never was one. So I was never that guy that was like, hey, prospect, do this, or because I didn't earn that right. So especially then early on, but even throughout the whole time I was in the club, I never, maybe attention as I'd been in after a while, maybe try and teach them things or whatever. But I never was the guy to run prospects or utilize prospects just because I'd never done it.
So now once you get into the club, right? Was it smooth sailing, or what did you have like law enforcement always on you? Because I know law enforcement is heavily on the Mongols. They're coming for the patch and court and everything else.
No, it was far from smooth sailing. So that first year was really rough. So first thing I did is we patched over, and the club that we patched over from was not happy about it. And we were getting a lot of threats, and there was a lot of drama with that. Those clubs that I mentioned that were in.
I hate to interrupt you, but do the rest of the members of that club stay in the club, and does the whole club patch over? How does that work?
Well, I came from, so I hung out with the outsiders. I prospected for the outsiders, and then I moved to Nevada, and actually I joined the Vagos at that time. So I was in the Vagos for 2 years, and the Vagos weren't as big as a national club as they are now, but they were a big club. They were always a big club. So when I patched over from the Vagos. So about a dozen or so Vagos came with us when we patched over, but obviously the whole core group of the club didn't, and there's still a lot of them, and actually now they're a very major club. So those are the ones that had issue. Like all the ones that stayed that knew me personally, we were friends. We spent time on the road together. Obviously, they saw it as disrespect, and I left and started a chapter in the state that they were in. So that created a lot of issues right out the gate.
I'm sure. So on top of that, you have law enforcement that's on you because you have this patch, right? Because
right. Well, those other clubs that I mentioned in Oregon, they've been there for years, and they had a kind of an agreement to keep other major clubs out of Oregon. Yeah. So as soon as we started that chapter, we had every club in Oregon telling us we couldn't be there, attempting to force us out. You can use your imagination on that one, but it was pretty hot. And then on top of that was law enforcement. So it was like the club we came from was after us. All the clubs in Oregon were after us. And then on top of that, because we were new to the area, law enforcement obviously didn't want us there. So they were extra hard on us compared to how they were before. I didn't know this, but this was 2007 when I joined. So it was towards the end of Black Rain. So ATF was going really hard on the Mongols. They had several informants within the club. Some of them were within that area I was in. So, I had informants in the chapter. So we were getting followed by the ATF and harassed all the time. I couldn't figure out how do these cops know everything? I mean, it was pretty crazy. All that was all within that first year. And then about 6 months within being into the club, I got arrested for following some cops that were trespassing on my property. I didn't realize they were cops. They were in plain clothes in a plain car.
You want
And
to
I chased
explain
them
that
off.
situation? How did
Yeah.
that play out?
Well, it was an ATF agent and then a local gang cop. Apparently, were trying to surveil my property, but at the time I was living on 150 acres out in the country, and so there's a newspaper article just came out in the big paper in Oregon, the Oregonian, about how the Mongols were in Oregon, how the Gypsy Jokers, the other clubs didn't want us there, pretty much saying like, hey, there's this war going on, everyone pay attention, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, you know how the media spins stuff anyway, so they made it sound pretty bad. So, you know, the day after this happens, this all black SUV is coming up my driveway. And you can imagine where most people's mind would go, especially after some stuff like that in the paper and with the way things were politically, locally. So I chased them. And when I chased them, they left my property. They drove back into town. They went to the Gypsy Jokers clubhouse and parked there for a little bit. Then they got back on the interstate and headed south. So I followed them for close to an hour. And every time I tried to get up next to them or near them, they would, you know, dodge me or, you know, take off or, you know, maneuver. And so I was in a car. And so I called or I was in a truck and I called some other Mongols that were down in the Eugene area, which was the way we were heading, and said, hey, maybe you guys, since they don't know what car you guys are in, maybe you guys can kind of meet us on the freeway and you can get up next to them and see what they look like or see who they are. And as we tried to do that, one of the guys kind of got in front of them and then we got behind. We essentially boxed this car in, which I didn't know was illegal by any means. But they hit their lights.
They don't have all the lights and shit on the cars, right?
No. But then they ended up hitting their sirens and their lights. So you know their dash lights and stuff. So everyone took off, but I got pulled over on the scene, and I wasn't that worried about it. I was like, all I did was follow a car from, 50 miles or so, but nothing illegal had happened. I was trying to figure out who was trespassing. In fact, now that it was cops, I was like, oh, cool, whatever. Then it wasn't a big risk. But they actually charged me with attempted kidnapping and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. So I had,
police officers.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so I sat in jail on that for 2 months with $1 million bail, and I fought it. I hired an attorney and took it to trial, and I got found not guilty. So I got found guilty of reckless driving, which is the misdemeanor, but I beat all the big charges.
And they put you all over the news, right?
Yeah, it was crazy, dude. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, when you got arrested, did you have your patch with you, and did the cops take the patch when you got
No, I was in a truck, so I didn't have it. I didn't have it with me. Thankfully, they didn't get it. But when I got out of jail, I was on, they gave me 5 years of felony gang probation with non-association. So anytime I hung out the club, I could be arrested and go back to jail, which happened a lot of times.
So but now you're the president at this time, though, right?
Yeah.
So what happens? You go for 2 months. You're in there for 2 months. You get out. You're still the president, right?
Yep.
What happens next?
Well, I knew that I was, at the time, like I said, I didn't know we had informants involved. So every time I was hanging out, I was getting caught. So I knew I wasn't going to last long doing that. So my brother ended up running for the chapter president, and he got it. And I moved to San Diego because I knew, I wanted to learn what I could about the club. San Diego was a really well respected chapter within the Mongols. I knew I could really learn like the California Mongol way. So that when I came back to Oregon, I could bring that back with me. I also knew the cops wouldn't extradite me on a misdemeanor warrant from Southern California back to Oregon. So I moved down to California and I was trying to, learn how to be the best Mongol I could be. And I was maybe there 4 months when Black Rain hit. So
your plan was to transfer probation or just to leave?
Nah, I just took off. Yeah.
Oh man, that's not how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah, no, that's not how you're supposed to do it. But then Black Rain hit, and pretty much everyone I known in the club had gotten arrested. Almost my whole chapter was busted. I was down there by myself with a warrant out. So I went back to Oregon and turned myself in. I figured it was probably better to do that than get caught down there and have to get extradited back and all that stuff. So I came home and turned myself in and did another 2 months then. And then I got out and went back to just being a Mongol, man. And I kept getting caught because, like I said, there were some informants still in.
Did you have an idea of who it was?
I know who it is now. Absolutely. For sure. But at the time I was young and I was naive. And honestly, man, I didn't know much about that world. In my head, I'd seen movies and I knew about like undercover cops, but these dudes were like doing dope. And I mean, these guys were the worst members we had. Like they were constantly in trouble. I was taking them to rehab. Like they were the last people they were actual criminals. Right. So they're the last people I would think like I didn't know what I guess I didn't know the concept of what a paid informant was back then, you know, so I was pretty naive. But because of them, I kept getting caught. I probably violated my probation 3 or 4 more times, and each time I'd have to go back for a month or two. But once, you know, the informants ended up either fizzling out or getting ran off, or, you know, the paperwork from Black Rain was starting to come out, so they couldn't really hang for too much longer. And once they were gone, everything was pretty chill. I stayed active in the club that whole time. I ended up moving to California to do my undergrad for a while. So I lived in Whittier. I worked on my bachelor's degree, started a Fullerton chapter there, then moved back to Oregon. And then I stayed in Oregon for quite a while. And then I moved out here to the Midwest in 2017 and started several chapters out here. And then I retired at the end of 2021 after 14 years.
Wow. So you were in the club for 14 years and you retired out good?
I was initially out good. I'm not out good anymore, but I was initially out good. Yeah.
Oh man, why what happened with that?
I mean, there's a lot of layers to it for sure, but you know, our national P had been kicked out of the club. There was a
Little
lot of
Dave,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah.
little Dave, all that big mess,
There was
right?
that big mess. There was a lot of drama going on with that, a lot of politicking and stuff. You know, a lot of people wondering who's going to run for P, and just I don't know. There was just a lot of political drama going on, and at the time, I decided, you know what, this is probably the good time for me to step away. So they let me leave in good standings. But I had the chapter I was in out here, Southern Illinois chapter. They only had about 5 members because, you know, a pretty small area. And one of the sarge for that chapter, he had gotten arrested for fighting with these outlaws, and one of the outlaws had pressed charges on him, and so he had to take a plea bargain because, you know, take it to trial with the victim. He was guilty, and it was on camera, and there wasn't much to fight. So part of his sentencing agreement was a 2-year suspended sentence. So if he got caught hanging out the Mongols, he'd go to prison for 2 years. So he obviously had to step away. I had just stepped away. So now there's 3 or 4 guys left, and one of them was that guy's biological brother. The other one worked with him, and, you know, they were kind of in the stage of like, hey man, we all did this together to be with each other, and now the main 2 guys are gone. So they left the club, and typically if you leave the club, if you haven't been in for 10 years, you're automatically out bad.